and resume my function, and I give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. President. We listened with interest to the briefings of Mr. Geir Peterson and Mr. Martin Griffiths. I would like to make the following remarks. The meetings of the sixth round of the Constitutional Committee held in Geneva last week showed a serious engagement on the part of the national team, who exhibited a spirit of cooperation and positivity. They were keen to put forward constitutional principles that respond to the aspirations, rights, and ambitions of the Syrian people in safeguarding national sovereignty, independence, security, stability, and socio-economic well-being. In this context, the Syrian Arab Republic reaffirms its commitment to a political solution based on a Syrian-owned, Syrian-led, intra-Syrian national dialogue. It would also be underpinned on the premise that the constitution is a Syrian sovereign national affair and that the Constitutional Committee is sovereign. Syria stresses that outside parties must refrain from interfering in the work of the committee or attempting to obstruct it or thwart it through imposing artificial timetables or predetermined conclusions. This, in accordance with the respect of the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria, which have been affirmed by all relevant Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, the cowardly terrorist attack in the heart of the Syrian capital, Damascus, on the morning of October the 20th, targeting a bus with 2 explosive devices, coincided with the meetings of the Constitutional Committee. This was a clear indication of the attempts of terrorist organizations and their foreign sponsors to foil attempts at reaching a political solution and hinder the Syrian government's efforts to restore security and stability all over Syria. This terrorist act, which left 14 civilians dead and many other passers-by injured, was clearly aimed at raising the morale of the terrorists, sponsored by the American and Turkish occupation forces in Idlib, Tanf, and other parts in the north of Syria, as they fall in the face of the Arab Syrian army and its allies' achievements. It's regrettable and reprehensible that some Western countries have obstructed the adoption of a draft press release submitted by the delegation of the Russian Federation to condemn this terrorist attack. This Western approach reflects their double standards and hostile attitude. It is also condemned that the Israeli occupation forces escalated their hysterical aggression against Syria, whether by bombing the southern region 2 days ago, following the reconciliations in Daraa and the restoration of security and stability there, or its preceding aerial aggression from Tanf, which is under the control of the American forces, or its assassination of the freedom fighter and former member of the Syrian parliament, Medhat Saleh, with snipers' fire bullets originating from the occupied Golan Heights. This proves once again Israel's engagement in undermining security and stability in Syria. The Syrian Arab Republic affirms its commitment to continue its efforts to liberate its occupied territories and combat terrorism in parallel with its political efforts. Such terrorist acts and attacks will not deter it from continuing its effort to restore security and stability and rid our people of all terrorist groups irrespective of their nomenclature. Syria calls upon the Security Council to assume its responsibilities and stop Israeli aggressions that threaten peace and stability in the region, and compel the governments known to be sponsors of terrorism to stop their violations of international law and comply fully with the Council's resolutions on counter-terrorism. Mr. President, yesterday, on behalf of my government, I sent 2 identical letters to the Council and His Excellency the Secretary General, conveying the position of the Syrian government on the Secretary General's report on the humanitarian situation. Due to the limited time available, I invite the Council's members to read these 2 letters and take note of our detailed observations on the report, especially after exposing errors in the ratios and statistics in the responses of UN agencies and the misinformation therein. We call for an investigation of the matter and rectifying the wrong and restoring the reputation of the Syrian government and ensure non-repetition. It's been over 3.5 months since this Council adopted Resolution 2585. However, the Turkish occupation forces and their terrorist organizations' proxies are still obstructing humanitarian access from inside Syria. They are still refusing access of the Arab convoy to the northwest of the country, a convoy approved by Syria in April of last year. Over and above, they are still using drinking water as a weapon against civilians. In addition, there is a deliberate intent on the part of the governments of some Western states to not respect the substance of operative paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 of the resolution, as they continue to thwart any effort aimed at making progress in humanitarian access from within Syria or to promote humanitarian activities to include early recovery and strengthening resilience, as provided for in the resolution and which are also part of the humanitarian response plan. Not only that, but these same governments have once again blocked the adoption of the strategic framework for cooperation between the United Nations and the Syrian government, which enables UN agencies to relaunch development programs and projects in Syria and support efforts to achieve sustainable development. This begs the question: how can the extension of the provisions of this resolution be envisaged for later this year? What will the Secretary General say in his substantive report due to be submitted pursuant to the resolution? Is it possible that the percentage of funding allocated to the early recovery projects does not exceed 5% of the total pledges? Mr. President, the continued use of coercive measures by the US administration and the European Union to stifle Syrians inhumanely and depriving them of their basic needs for food, medicine, healthcare, electricity, and fuel, particularly as the winter is approaching, and weakening our efforts to counter the COVID-19 pandemic, all of the above contradicts their alleged humanitarian concern and exposes their fictitious slogans on the respect of the principles of international law and the provisions of the UN Charter as well as all UN resolutions which have confirmed time and again the illegality of these measures and their violation of human rights. They have also deliberately disregarded the appeals of the Secretary General and his representatives. Thus, any claims that there is no impact of such measures on the life of Syrians is a falsification to cover up the facts. To conclude, Mr. President, Syria renews its demand to end the illegal presence of American and Turkish forces on our territory and to stop their aggressive practices and their plundering of the country's economic resources and the country's wealth. We also call for the immediate and unconditional lifting of the unilateral coercive measures imposed on the Syrian people. We stress that improving the humanitarian situation requires the support of the Syrian government's efforts to meet the humanitarian needs and provide basic services to all Syrians, as well as achieving the SDGs while creating conditions conducive for the safe, dignified, and voluntary return of the displaced and refugees. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement.